field in economics of the last 40 years. It's grown very rapidly since it began. It began actually at my university, Cornell University, under the leadership primarily of Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in 2017 for his contributions to the founding of behavioral economics. I think most people in the beginning saw behavioral economics as a new social science at the intersection of economics and psychology. That people were not always the perfectly rational individuals assumed in economic models, that instead they often got things wrong, even when the problems were fairly simple and they had all the information necessary to solve them right at their fingertips, still they made mistakes. I think that has been an important set of insights. Daniel Kahneman, whose work with Amos Tversky was one of the big influences on Richard Thaler's work in the beginning, himself won a Nobel Prize in economics. He was a psychologist. So I think it's widely accepted now that psychology has useful things to say about behavior in economic contexts. Economists have always believed that everything is an economic context. We need to make choices when there are competing alternatives. It's never possible to do everything you would like to do, and so you must trade one desirable thing off against another. And so everything is really an economic decision, and how people make decisions doesn't always follow the simple rational choice model that economists started out using. My own interest in the beginning was in adding the insights of Darwin to economics. I agree that psychology is a very important addition to economics, but I think Darwinian thinking makes an important contribution too. And if we were to ask, where do the biggest losses occur in markets? Where do we fall the most short of achieving the maximum attainable goals that we might attain in markets? It's because of forces that Charles Darwin described clearly, not because of psychological decision error tendencies. So that's been my view. I think it's still the majority view that behavioral economics is mostly economics and psychology, although more people are beginning to recognize the importance of Darwin's insights too.
Thank you, Robert. You partially covered, maybe we can go to the next topic, and Yashar has more question about this. You partially covered in our last conversation, but due to its importance, I would like to ask in another way. You have been a vocal advocate for progressive consumption tax, and we discussed about that, you explained beautifully. But what do you see the biggest challenges in implementing such a tax, and how could governments can effectively promote its adoption? You mentioned part of it before, but I would like to hear, and Yashar has more question about this progressive consumption tax that you are proposing.
Well, just to recap from our discussion last time, the idea behind the progressive consumption tax is to try to discourage some of the waste that happens in private consumption spending. What we know from many detailed studies of the determinants of human flourishing is that beyond a certain point, and it's one that's been passed long ago in most developed countries, further increases across the board in most forms of private consumption don't produce any measurable increases in human flourishing. When the mansions all get bigger, the people living in them are not any happier. When people all spend more on their daughters' wedding receptions, the people who go to those parties are no happier than before. in each case, all that happens is that the bar rises that defines what we consider necessary or even adequate. It would be much better, rather than spend money on more expensive, bigger cars, bigger mansions, more expensive parties, it would be better to spend those same dollars on things that evidence suggests would be of great benefit to everybody. So a more securely accessible medical system. Many people still lack good access to medical services. It would be quite easy to finance better access if we spent less on private consumption. Even the basic infrastructure. I like this thought experiment a lot. Who would be happier? A wealthy driver in a world with low taxes who is driving his Ferrari on roads riddled with foot-deep potholes, or a wealthy driver in a separate world that has higher taxes who drives his much less expensive Porsche Turbo on roads that are well maintained. What we know is that no matter how wasteful you think the government is, the government with more tax revenue maintains the roads more effectively. Most of government dollars spent are on things that citizens value, like bridges and roads and hospitals and other things. So if you think, as I do, that that's an easy question to answer, of course, the wealthy driver of a Porsche on well-maintained roads would have a better experience than the even wealthier driver of the Ferrari on roads that were very poorly maintained. Then the rich give up nothing by allowing heavier tax on them that could be used to finance better public services. So how would the progressive consumption tax serve that goal? It's a very simple modification to the current income tax system. You'd report your income to the IRS, the tax authorities, as you do now. Also, you would report how much your savings had grown during the year. Those two amounts, your income and your savings, we would subtract your savings from your income. That difference is the amount you spent during the year. And that amount minus a standard deduction, say $10,000 per person, would be your taxable consumption. The rates would start off very low. The tax rate facing a family would be much lower under that system than under the current income tax system, up to $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 a year. But beyond that point, the tax rate on each additional dollar of consumption would keep rising, and it could rise much beyond what the top tax rate is on income, because now we keep income tax rates lower than we would like because we're afraid of choking off investment and savings. If we had higher progressive consumption tax rates, that would actually encourage savings and investment. So that's the basic argument. If we had a progressive consumption tax, we would steer resources away from very high levels of private consumption, which produce no measurable benefits for anyone, and steer them instead into expenditures on services that evidence suggests are of great value to people.
Thank you. I think, Yashar, you can maybe jump in now and ask your question about the consumption rates.
Sure. Thanks for Mehdi for opportunity, and Dr. Frank is big honor. And also 2024 was one of the eventful year, and losing the Daniel Kahneman is one of those eventful events. It make everybody sad, honestly.
Yeah, of course.
Dr. Frank, you have two parts in your opinion. First, lowering the consumption, which me as a YouTuber is small part of this finance world. I always encourage people to save more, invest more, but I use a YouTube or book or education for this method. But you suggesting we use government and tax for this method. And I remember on the first podcast, you gave example about a tobacco tax. If I remember the number correctly, the tobacco tax lowered the smoking rate from 48% to 11%. You might correct me on those numbers.
That's essentially right.
You never, honestly, you never give any other example, some of the failure of the tax system. One of the readily available example comes to my mind is school tax. I believe
tax? I'm sorry, school tax. Yeah.
Yes. 78 years ago, government decided every student needs to have access to free education. For this, they designed property tax, and all the income for the school comes from that property tax. So nobody should denied of free education. But the problem, if 78 years ago somebody gave this idea, everybody loved it because every student needs free education. But if we fast forward it to this 2024, we're gonna see a bunch of islands, zip code island, which is wealthier than other zip codes, and the kids living on those zip codes, they're getting better education in compared with other kind of poor zip codes. And the other problem it caused, the property on those zip codes is causing the price of them keep going higher and higher. And this caused a huge economical disparity between poor and wealthy. How do you explain this situation or other kind of failure in tax system?
Yeah, those are good questions. I certainly would never recommend using property taxes to pay for education. That whoever had that idea had a bad idea, and it has had many adverse effects. It has not made property more expensive in the most expensive areas in terms of the actual home prices. Because when the taxes on those homes are higher, that means people can afford to pay less for the homes themselves. So it hasn't had that one effect that you mentioned. But if we want to pay for education or any other public service, there are very strong arguments for paying for education publicly. There are many strong arguments for building roads and bridges publicly. We could do those things privately, and in certain instances we do, but it's much, much more efficient to do them publicly and make access to them, not something that you pay each time you use a road, but you can use the road as you need it. When it's not crowded, especially, that makes the most sense. So the philosophy of taxation I embrace is that we should tax only behaviors that cause undue harm to other people. So don't tax property. Property doesn't harm anybody else. We should tax, for example, vehicles by weight. Think about a motorist's decision about how big a car to buy. If everybody else is driving 2,000-pound cars and he buys a 6,000-pound car, he will be much safer than he was before. And so that's a rational reason to consider buying a bigger car. But the effect of him buying a bigger car is that everybody else in the 2,000-pound cars is now much less safe than before. Maybe it's their best choice in response to buy a 6,000-pound car also. But when everybody has a 6,000-pound car, everybody is in more danger than when everybody had a 2,000-pound car. This is just another example of behaviors that I call smart for one, dumb for all. They're behaviors that look attractive to us as individuals, yet when we all do them, we get a result we don't like. The simplest example is everybody standing up at a crowded event to see better. Nobody sees any better than if everybody had remained comfortably seated. You don't regret standing up because if you hadn't stood, you can't see at all. But if somehow a convention could be implemented where we all remain seated, everybody would be happier. So that's my response. Yes, there are many bad taxers. Taxing anything that has good effects. We tax all sorts of things that we have absolutely no reason to curtail. We should tax only those things that cause harm. And there are so many of them that we could raise all the revenue we need without ever taxing anything that's helpful.
Dr. Frank, you mentioned Daniel Kahneman, and also, you know, one of the bigger theory they have, this was hindsight bias. So we know we have a problem with environment at this situation, and we have a global warming. Recently, doctor find out smoking is bad. And as you mentioned, using bigger car can harm others. But in some topics like consumption, this line is blurry between good and bad. How we can know something is good or something is bad without having that hindsight information which give us that result?
The ideal consumption tax would be to tax every good in proportion to the extent to which its value depends on how it compares with other goods in the same category, how context sensitive is its value. This is what Fred Hirsch called a positional good. So is my house okay? You can't answer that question unless you know something about the context in which your house sits. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Nepal long ago, I lived in a 2-room house. It had no running water, no electricity. For the 2 years I lived in that house, it was completely satisfactory. If I lived in that same house here in Ithaca, New York, it would be completely unsatisfactory. My children would have been embarrassed for their friends to see where we lived. The only difference is the context in the two places. And so the ideal tax would take context into account in determining the tax rate on every good. That's completely impractical. We don't have the information to do that. The progressive consumption tax is a nice compromise because it says for people who don't spend very much, probably most of what they're spending on is things broadly construed as necessities. Once your income goes above $1 million a year, $2 million a year, and you're spending most of that on private consumption, what we can say with confidence is that the next thing you would spend any additional income you had on would not be a necessity. It would be, in some construal or other, a luxury, and luxuries are by their very nature all highly context sensitive. And so the progressive consumption tax roughly achieves what the ideal consumption tax would, and it doesn't require nearly as much information and complex implementation apparatus.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we can come back to this later if needed, but let's switch the gear. So I have a question, but Yashar also can have other questions related to this. In the success and luck, Robert, you discuss about the role of luck in economic success. How should acknowledging the role of success of luck, the role of luck, reshape how we think about the meritocracy? That's the subtitle of your book, especially in countries like United States that place such a high value in individual achievement. Yashar has a question, but I ask what is the alternative to this meritocracy? So we have to get rid of this, or how you see this in US?
Yeah, I had some arguments with my publisher about the subtitle. I am not opposed to hiring the most qualified worker for any job. That seems like the best system compared to any alternative. The point of the use of meritocracy in the title is that the people who are the best positioned to get any job, in particular the most competitive, sought-after jobs, are almost always very talented and hardworking. But in addition, they're almost always among the luckiest of the finalists who were competing for those positions. And you can think about it this way. In a winner-take-all economy where the top jobs pay enormous salaries, there are, of course, many people who want to hold those jobs. If you ask yourself, how can I get one of the top jobs? The most important thing is work hard and start with a lot of talent. Those two things are very important. But it's also important to be lucky, knowing the right person, meeting the right person to introduce you into a network that will get you an opportunity to learn something that would be valuable in the job that you'd most want to have. All those things matter too. And we can study the effect of those things using simple mathematical simulations. So we can look at examples where you have lots of people who have various levels of talent and effort. The people who get the top jobs almost always will be people who are at the top of the talent and effort distributions. There are very few people who are unqualified in the most competitive jobs. But even in contests where talent and effort count for 98% of performance and luck only 2%, there are limits on how talented you can be, on how hard you can work. And so the finalists for those jobs, for the contest to see who gets those jobs, are all very talented. They're all very hardworking, but they're not all equally lucky. Some will be luckier than average, others be less lucky than average. If we just look at the most talented, hardworking person, that person will have average luck on the average. He might be lucky, he might be unlucky. On average, he'll have. But we know that there are so many people who have almost the same level of talent and effort that among that large group, there will be some, at least, who are very lucky. And even if luck counts for only 2% of performance, that's all it takes for that person to perform better than the most talented person. So I think once people understand how even in arenas where luck plays a fairly minor role, you wouldn't get the prize unless you were lucky. That makes you more grateful for the good circumstances you enjoy. And when people begin to realize that they were not only hardworking, talented, but also lucky, then they become much more willing to invest in opportunities for other people. They become more generous, they become more grateful. All those things are good outcomes.
That's great. I think that the book already changed my mind, how I'm looking at my success if I'm a successful person. But I look at the role of others, role of the situation, environment, and I try in my small portion to help bring the luck or success or situation for other people to the best I can. Yashar, you have more questions about the meritocracy and the merit-based discussion that we have?
Not really. One of the topics, I believe Daniel Dennett talked about it. He argued on his book, the luck and environmental factor is like a vector. Some of them in different directions, some of them they might point to the same direction. In some cases, they might cancel each other. And like, I believe like we always talk about how some successful person gets lucky, but I never hear a conversation talks about the bad luck or unlucky ones. For example, I have a hard time to evaluate, for example, Elon Musk, if he's lucky or he's not he's unlucky. He's immigrant. He came from South Africa. He always mentioned I had an abusive father. He always mentioned I have autism, Asperger's syndrome. For example, I'm just giving him as an example, how we can evaluate this guy as a lucky guy, unlucky guy, or someone who all the vector cancel each other on him.
Yeah, of course, if there's good luck, there's also bad luck. And most of us have experienced both kinds of luck during our life trajectories. And if you're lucky, the good luck outweighs the bad luck. I know less than you do about Musk's personal history, he seems, at the very least, to be a strange person. I wouldn't want to make any general pronouncements about whether he deserves to be as rich as he is or not. I don't know anything about what his actual contribution was in the industries where he's made most of his money, but yeah, having an abusive father, that's bad luck. It would be better to have a supportive father. So if he succeeded in spite of that, then maybe he had. In the end, it's really all about luck. So you can say, well, it's talent, it's effort, and it's luck, but where do talent and effort come from? We don't know exactly, but we can say that they're a consequence of some poorly understood mix of genetic and environmental influences. And can you claim moral credit for having had good genes when you were born? Can you claim moral credit for having had a family that raised you in a supportive way? If you had those things, you're lucky. I think it's probably not a good idea to think of it being all about luck, because if you think it's all luck, I think you'll find it harder to summon the effort you need to summon when you confront difficult situations. You have to feel like it's up to me, and if I don't try hard, I'll fail. If you think, oh, it's all luck, that encourages you to sit back and hope things turn out all right. Much better if you take an active hand in trying to forge your own fate.
Dr. Frank, one of the theory, I believe Milton Friedman, one of the other economic Nobel Prize winner, brought it up. He was basically arguing, instead of like we look at the cause, if we look at the outcome, somebody is successful. He gave this example, if I remember it correctly. He said, if we have the best violin on the world and we want to gift it to somebody, and our options is some regular guy in the street, maybe he's homeless, he can sell it and he can enjoy the money of it. And also other option we have is the best violin player in the world. We still need to gift that violin to that best violin player, despite all the privilege he had, despite all the luck he had in his life, because by giving that violin to him, we can cause all society enjoy that music. Are you agree with his opinion or disagree?
I'm surprised Friedman didn't continue to say that if we give the violin to the homeless guy and he sells it, then it will eventually end up in the hands of the best violinist, the person to whom it would be of greatest value. Markets aren't perfect. There are people who have paintings on their walls who don't enjoy those paintings nearly as much as I would. They have them because they can afford them and I can't. Nobody pretends that the distribution of goods and services that result from the existing distributions of income and wealth have any claim to being morally fair. Is this the distribution that maximizes the human flourishing on the planet? Nobody would even think to defend that claim except for a very naive free marketeer. All those things are highly contingent on all sorts of accidents of circumstance. What we can say, though, is that if you can figure out a way to make the market more efficient, it's always possible to divide up the bigger pie you get so that everybody gets a bigger slice than before. And that's a good thing. That just means they're better able to pursue their goals than they were before you did that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can go to another topic about winner take all. Yashar has some question about this as well. You have written extensively on the winner takes all a few decades ago, nature of modern economics. With increasing technological advancement and even globalization, do you see this trend is intensifying, not only in US, in general, in developing countries? And if yes, what are the potential long-term consequences if left unchecked, if we move toward this winner-takes-all society? And I think Yashar has some question after that.
It is getting more concentrated, and it will continue. I mean, you can see it, how that has happened over the centuries. At a point in the not too distant past, let's say 1800 or thereabouts, most of the pianos that were produced in the world were produced within just a few miles of where the buyers lived. That was because pianos were so heavy and difficult to transport. Then there were canals, then there were railroads, then there were ocean shipping containers. It became cheaper and cheaper to move pianos from one place to another. And because there are such powerful scale economies of production in the manufacture of pianos, it became cheaper to concentrate production in fewer and fewer places. Now, almost all of the world's pianos are built in just a small handful of locations. That's the basic idea. Transportation costs, broadly construed, got cheaper. The way that's played out in the centuries since, probably one of the most important dimensions of the story is that the intellectual value of the ideas embedded in a product has grown steadily. So we see that in the early 1980s, the value of a computer was much more in the hardware than in the ideas that were embedded in it. Now it's most of the value that computer is in the ideas embedded in the computer. And ideas are free to ship anywhere in the world. If it's just an idea that can be represented in a file, we can push send and it goes anywhere in the world instantaneously for free. And so the effect of that is that if somebody is the best at producing a certain kind of product, or the best at coming up with the ideas that make a product valuable, then we can concentrate the value behind that product in fewer and fewer hands, because that small number of people can essentially serve the entire world market. There's no barrier to getting a connection between what they make and buyers anywhere on the planet. Once the ideas constitute 95% of the value of a product, then the shipping weight is trivial. It doesn't matter. So that's going to continue to play out, and it has two competing effects. One is that it's advantageous to buy products from the best producers. If they're the best producers, that means their version of the product is better than the versions made by others. And so if we can buy from the best, if we have a seriously ill child, it's better to get advice from the world's expert on whatever disease the child has than it is to see the local physician who knows the most about it. The world expert now can be on the other side of the planet, and it's free to consult with that person over Zoom as we're talking now. So that's the benefit of winner take all. The downside of winner take all is that more and more incomes get concentrated in the hands of the people who win the contests to be the top producers in each category. And that creates ever-growing inequality of income and wealth. And it's the growing disparities of income and wealth that have led to the inefficient consumption patterns that the progressive income tax is meant to attack. Provided we took those policy measures, then winner take all would actually be an unambiguously good thing. The pie gets bigger if we raise the revenue from a progressive consumption tax and distribute the revenue across the people on the planet in the way that does the most good for the most people, then that's a better outcome than we could get any other way.
Yashar, you have questions about winner take all. Go ahead.
About the same topic, winner takes it all. Dr. Frank, if we talk about, we can talk about individual group or company group. If we look at the S&P 500, some of the stats from it, I just researched for this video. And you, on the first podcast, you said the disparity getting bigger and bigger, and obviously the bigger companies are growing exponentially, and a smaller one left behind. I just find this stat in on S&P 500, which include the 500 biggest company in United States. In 1965, the average year every company was on that list was 32 years. But after 32 years, for example, you were get kicked out of there. In 2020, it became 21 years. In 2021, 16 years, and they're predicting in 2027 that company average time of staying in S&P 500 is only 12 years. And if we come back, if we find a company which is for sure is winner take all, isn't that humane? We recommend everybody to go buy their stock because they're gonna be winner for sure.
Yeah, you're right. The big companies very rarely make it past their teenage years. They're very fragile. And that's a testament to the fact that the marketplace has become so much more competitive now than it used to be. There's much better information about product quality, about opportunities to engage in transactions that you didn't before know existed. And so because the conditions are so much more highly competitive, the companies are forced to change much more rapidly, and most of them cannot. They have one good idea. They grow quickly. They enter the S&P 500. They become a bigger share for a few years, and then someone else has an idea that displaces that good idea, and they don't adapt. They don't come up with anything new, and they fall out. There are a few interesting exceptions. Apple it has been a company that has succeeded not just because it had one powerful idea, but because it had a culture that seemed to foster the introduction of a succession of new ideas. Will they be able to continue doing that? I don't know. But the fact of income and wealth becoming more concentrated is not changed by the fact that the companies themselves go out of business. I mean, it's not the companies that are the drivers of the wealth. It's the people whose ideas drive those companies through their arc of achievement. And when those companies go out of business, sometimes the founders retire as billionaires, other times not, and they go on and they succeed in another arena. So yeah, it's a complicated story, but the idea that winner take all markets continue to foster growing income and wealth inequality, I don't think is incompatible with the observation that companies don't live very long.
Thank you very much.
So Robert Frank, so I think because this is a new area that some of the behavioral geneticists, some other psychologists are also moving about the role of social media and AI, like controlling our behavior, not only toward what we do on a daily basis, but also to what we buy or how we interact with technologies. I would like to ask your opinion about this growing area of AI, like artificial intelligence, how they're shaping our life in a way that even our economy or financial decisions are being impacted by this growing, very fast growing. You know that, yes, it's 10 years ago, nobody knew that the ChatGPT-4 is doing kind of this, maybe intelligence. So I would like to hear what you see the next 10 years or 20 years if the AI grow this way from the economic or financial impact our behavior.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'm not deeply informed about all the technical details of where AI will be most useful and where it won't succeed. I can mention the experience of one of my sons, who is the director of one of the big tech teams at the New York Times, groups of programmers who help establish the Times internet face to the world. And in his case, he has discovered that there are things he can instruct AI to do that AI can do successfully, that individual employees used to do, coders used to do. And so and they're mostly the most routine of coding tasks. Figuring out how to make the best use of AI in that context is the big value added activity. If you are somebody who was doing tasks that AI can be instructed by the right leader to do, you're a loser in that process. And so the basic pattern I've seen in his domain is that this is a pure stimulus to winner take all. The people who can figure out how to harness AI and get it to do something useful, those are people who can design tasks for AI that used to be done by employees further down the ladder. Those employees now face reduced demand for their services, and the person who instructs AI to do the task is now more valuable than before because AI is cheap. It's the person who knows how to tell AI what to do that's adding value in that transaction. I think that's one specific example, but it seems to be a good paradigm for many, many other domains. And so my expectation would be that this will be a very powerful contributing factor to further growth of winner-take-all effects in the marketplace.
Great. Yasha, do you have any question about Laura's social media or AI?
Sure. Can we jump to happiness
Yeah,
topic?
maybe that's also happiness as well, yes, because now it's
Sorry
happiness is also. No.
Sorry, I'm going back to Daniel Kahneman.
Okay.
I remember Daniel Kahneman in last couple of years of his life, he mentioned, I'm working on this happiness subject. It's so complicated. Basically, it made him tired, and I believe he gave up, or maybe he just still have some article left over from him. But on the first podcast, you said happiness is opposite correlation with consumerism. Basically, you said the more we consume, the happiness is gonna go down. But some psychologists believe we humans are not designed to be happy. We have a pessimist mind. And you also mentioned loss aversion on your first video with Mehdi, because this pessimist mind helped us to survive in jungle. When tiger attacked us, we survived them. Blaming consumerism and not using our animal nature, because we used to go hunting, we used to try to feed our gut, try to find shelter for ourselves, and that keep our brain occupied, and that cause we never feel sadness. Right now we have so much comfort, I believe. The phrase comes to my mind is cactus in rainforest. We have so much rain for our body, so much comfort. That is why we don't think about shelter. We don't think about vitamin or food. That is why we start feeling unhappy. And also Steven Pinker, I believe, said, people think they were more happier in the past. And that is basically bias, because nothing is more responsible for good old days than bad memory.
Yeah, I don't think that the human nervous system was forged by natural selection to make people happy. It would have been fairly easy to build a nervous system like that, but a nervous system like that would not have been hungry, and so would not have been motivated to compete for resources. And what Darwin saw clearly was that a nervous system that rewards you for getting additional resources is one that will maximize your chances to leave surviving offspring. And what that means is that one of the things we care most about is how we rank relative to others with whom we compete. In the early days of evolution, there were always frequent famines. Even in the worst famines, there was always some food. Who got the food? It was not the low-ranking individuals, it was the high-ranking individuals. And in the competition for mates, most early societies and most vertebrate species even today were polygynous, meaning that males take more than one mate if they can. The qualifier is important because if some males take more than one mate, that means other males don't get any mates at all, which is, of course, the very worst position in the Darwinian scheme of things. And so what the Darwinian theory predicts is that the human nervous system should reward you, give you feelings of pleasure for taking steps that increase your resource holding relative to others around you. And that's completely consistent with the subjective experience of virtually everybody who has any opinion on this. Or you get a promotion, you're excited. You win the lottery, you're excited. It's all about moving up in relative terms. Should you then be content and happy? No. If you don't keep competing, either to hold your position or to move up further, then somebody else will go past you, and you'll retreat in relative terms. So yeah, that is not a recipe for being happy. That's a recipe for struggle, anxiety, and so on. But we would ignore the concern about relative position at our peril. The good thing in the case of human being is if we recognize that if everybody tries 10% harder, there's still only 10% of the people in the top 10%, we can enact policies that reduce the incentive to work longer hours. We can have a law that says if you work more than 40 hours, the employer has to pay you a premium rate. That discourages people from working longer hours. We can have laws that say national holidays occur on these days. You can't work on those days. That means you might be tempted to get ahead by working on those days, but there's no working on those days. We can do all sorts of policies that short circuit the consequence that's analogous to everybody standing up to see better.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Before I ask my last question, Yasha, do you have a last question or topic to discuss? Because of the sake of time, maybe we can go 10, 15 minutes. Do you want to start other topic?
I think I'm good. I
good?
asked majority of my question.
Okay. So just for audience, of course, Iranians we discussed about the happiness in another podcast with two of my colleagues. I put a link of that. So we talk about the psychological and biological and genetic aspects of happiness. We recorded a few episodes about that. You can listen. My last question, Robert, is about... yes.
I do have a quick question for
Go
Doctor.
Ahead. Go ahead.
Dr. Frank, considering, you don't have to answer this question, considering Kamala Harris' position about price control, are you going to vote for her?
Am I going to vote for her?
Considering her economical position about the price control.
She has not advocated price controls. She has advocated steps to limit what she calls price gouging. And there are very compelling arguments against any system of comprehensive price controls. There are plausible arguments in favor of the much more limited step of trying to control price gouging. Price gouging is a much more isolated phenomenon. It's for example, when there's a snowstorm, everybody wants to buy a snow shovel. There aren't enough snow shovels. The price of snow shovels goes from $10 to $100. The cost of the snow shovel hasn't gone up. They're just in short supply. An anti-price gouging measure would say, no, you can't raise the price of snow shovels to $100. We could debate whether that's a good idea to do that or not. There are arguments that you could offer in both directions, but most firms don't listen to those arguments. They don't raise the price of snow shovels during a snowstorm, even if they're in short supply. They just tell buyers, we've run out, we don't have any more, because they know buyers will get angry if they raise the price of snow shovels when they are in short supply like that. And then they won't shop at the same store even after the snowstorm. So it's really it's a step meant to limit the political damage caused by steep price increases during supply interruptions. And if there's value in political stability, that is a trade-off against whatever misallocations might result from not having the scarcity correct price for a good at any moment.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
And am I going to vote for her? Am I going to vote for her? Yes, I'm going to vote for her.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so it was a good discussion. So as a last question, so it is related to what Yashar asked. In your view, how can the US or other capitalist economies achieve a more equitable distribution of wealth? You discussed part of this without falling into the pitfalls of extreme socialism or over-regulation, because that's always a concern from the right wings or right people who are thinking about that, which some argue can stifle personal freedoms and also economic dynamism. So how this can be managed in a way that we still get advantage of the capitalism, but not falling in the extreme socialism that overregulation or socialism can cause?
Yeah, I think the most attractive proposal I've seen has been one that in the current political domain has come from Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, and he proposes that we establish what he calls baby bonds. Every baby, when born, gets a large deposit into a capital account from the government, funded by, if I were in charge, funded by a progressive consumption tax, a carbon tax, tax on vehicles by weight, taxes on harmful activities, which would be good to do anyway, no matter what we did with the revenue. Put some of that revenue into an account for every child. The accounts could be augmented in a progressive way so that if your parents are already wealthy, you don't get a big deposit into your baby account when you're born. But if your parents are poor, then you would get a bigger deposit. And then every year, more is added to those accounts, and they grow and they compound exponentially year after year. And that one step would be administratively extremely simple, and in a generation's time would wipe out much of the inequality of wealth that we've seen over the centuries develop in this country, at least.
Yeah, that's because we moved from Canada to US. Canada has the same policy, so they call Registered Education Saving Plan. When my kids, one of them born there, and they deposited a $500, I guess, and then every few years they added some, and then last year he used around $25K for his education, and then he paid some tuition. So that might be a kind of policy that we don't fall in the extreme socialism, but at least helping families. Yashar, do you have any last questions or thoughts that you want to ask?
I'm hesitant to ask this question because probably it has a long answer. So
it's okay. I think we have a few minutes. It's okay. I think you can.
Okay, so Dr. Frank, so you're pro-engineering the society, like designing something for people, assuming government or academia knows better than themselves for their own good. Like the example you gave, what is the difference between that bond, child bond or baby bond, and social security, which is a huge failure and huge burden to American society?
I don't think government knows better than the individual. What I think is that there are many decisions we all make that have a very simple property. What's attractive to us individually is extremely unattractive to us when we all do it. I mentioned the example of standing to see better, building a bigger mansion. If you build a bigger mansion, that makes you happy because it feels big, it feels wonderful, but then all the mansions grow to be that size, and then the mansion feels normal again. There's no further pleasure to be derived from it. Whereas if that same money had been spent to develop a cure for cancer, you'd probably live 15 years longer into your healthy old age. It would be a better use of the money. It's not saying the government knows better. It's saying that you as a voter know that many things that will be in your interest individually to do are not in our interest to do. It would be better for us to put that money elsewhere than to put it where we would choose individually to spend it. Tom Schelling had a great example. The motorist in the northbound lane of a freeway slows down to look over at the accident that's blocking traffic in the southbound lane. Is that a good thing to do? Well, he gets to the scene of the accident. He's curious. It costs him 10 seconds to slow down and look. He could keep looking straight ahead and save 10 seconds. He says, rationally, it's worth 10 seconds. What's going on over there? I want to know. What he doesn't consider is that the 10 seconds he slows down is added to the delay of all the thousands of motorists behind him. If they had to take a vote on should we slow down when we get to the seat of the accident, they would all vote no. But that we don't make it that decision as a group, we make it as individuals. And when you get there as an individual, the answer is yes. That's the sense in which the government might put a barrier up at the scene of an accident to prevent people from looking to see what's going on. It's not because the government's smarter than you, it's because the government understands the incentive structure inherent in that decision.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. It was a very good discussion. So do you have anything, Robert, to add to this?
No, I enjoy talking about these issues. I think the frustrating thing in discussion often is that if people think something resembles socialism, it's therefore a bad idea. I think socialism, if you interpret that to mean the old Soviet economy where the government owned all the resources and tried to have a detailed plan for how everything should be produced, then that's a terrible idea. But the idea of making policies to steer resources away from unproductive uses into more productive ones, that's not socialism. That's just recognition of the simple fact that individual and collective interests are often wildly divergent. And why should we sit helplessly by as other animal species do? They can't make policies and give competing incentives for how to behave, but we can, and we miss a valuable opportunity when we don't do that.
Great. The next few minutes. So for Yashar, in the last talk we had, I asked about the meaning of the life from Robert, and then I think Robert's 80th birthday is coming in the winter. Congratulations in advance to you. But I'm listening to a really good podcast by Professor Peter Singer. Maybe, I don't know, you know him
I know
or
him,
not.
yes.
Yeah, so he's broadcasting a new podcast called Lives Well Lived. So he's talking about the people who lived well, like supposedly, like the first episode was with Daniel Kahneman before he passed away a few months ago. It was a really good podcast. I will put a link to that.
Oh, good.
But, yeah, but for
Yeah.
the last question, so I can ask the same question. Have you lived well? So how do you see yourself? This is the question he asked. I'm just taking from him, but maybe for the last question and give some idea, because I think when we see from outside, you are a very successful person, very prominent economist, and wrote many books. How do you see, if you look back your life, have you lived well? Or if you were born again, will you change the path, or what part you change?
Yeah, I've got much to be grateful for. I've got 4 wonderful sons. They're each in their own way very, very amazing. I'm proud of each of them. I have not suffered the tragedy that is, by all accounts, the very worst tragedy that can happen, which is to lose a child. That's not happened to me, and I've had a long and by external measures successful career. I was lucky to get the job I got when I got it at Cornell, lucky to keep it when I got to keep it, and had good opportunities along the way. So yes, I'm very grateful for a host of details about my life. As I said, we're not engineered by natural selection to be happy. And so as I approach the end of my life, I'm carrying burdens of regret as well. I feel very regretful that I was unsuccessful in persuading people to adopt the ideas that I've tried to put forward in the policy domain. I think they're simple ideas. I think I've explained them clearly. I think the evidence is very compelling that we would all be better off if we adopted, for example, a progressive consumption tax. And yet I feel we're no closer to that end than when I first started advocating it 40 years ago. And so I feel a certain sadness. Should I have worked harder? Should I have been more creative in trying to pursue, because failure to take advantage of opportunities like that means everybody loses. We could all be better off if we did those things. So yeah, but on balance, I feel like I've been very lucky to have lived the life that I've lived.
That's great. I think we can talk, maybe your new book will be published soon, the one that you send me the PDF?
It will not be published soon. I thought I would send it to Princeton. Princeton published each of the books that is on the screen behind you. They've done a couple of other of my books as well. I'm very happy with them. They produce very handsome books. They keep them in print for a long time. I thought, well, I'll send it to Princeton. And we got a note back from the editor saying, oh, we love the story, but since it's an attempt to explain how I came to think about the ideas I've written about over the decades, there's a substantial autobiographical component to it. And the editor wrote, we don't find that memoir is a genre we've been successful in. So okay. Princeton didn't want it. Maybe somebody else will take it, but I have the fear that in general, it's not a good time in publishing to bring out books that recount the experiences of non-famous people. So I don't know whether it'll be published or not.
Hopefully you can publish it and we can arrange another session. We can meet about,
I would, of
talk
course,
about
be
that.
delighted.
Yeah, I haven't finished that, but maybe 1/3 of that I already read. So I continue reading and we can discuss when it's published. Enjoy your birthday in winter with your family, friends, and wish you all the best the rest of the year and also subsequent years.
Thank you very much, Mehdi, and good to talk to you again. And Yashar, nice to meet you for the first time.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep.
Thank you, Yashar, for accepting to be here. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.